Hi everyone, my name is Justina and I'm going to present you with a case study about the cluster genealogy. I recently completed this one based on my own family, and it did knock down a very big brick wall for me, so hopefully you're going to enjoy this presentation. The ancestor I'm starting with is Stanisława Konstancja Jarzyńska. I know that she married Józef Piekarek. On Project Poznan, I found their indexed marriage record, which you can see in front of you. I found birth records of 7 of their children. I also know that she died in 1938, and looking at the records, she was either born in 1855 or 1865. But all three records are consistent when it comes to the names of her parents, which is Jakub Jarzyński and Katarzyna Marcinkowska. So knowing I'm working in Gniezno, I went to BaSIA Database, which is actually great for Prussian partition. It covers a little bit of Russian partition as well. It has birth, marriages, and death records in them, indexed in them. And I found the baptism record for my Stanisława Konstancja in Gniezno Parish of Holy Trinity in 1865. So she got married at the same church she was baptized in. Now, a side note, Gniezno was in Prussian partition, and that means civil registration is only available starting October 1st, 1874. Before that, you only have church records to work with, which actually don't contain much information to go on. So let's take a closer look at the baptism record. It is correct. Stanisława Konstancja was a daughter of Jakub Jarzyński, Katarzyna Marcinkowska. There is a small side note under Jakub. Right here, it actually mentions that he was deceased at the time of the baptism of his daughter. Before I move on with this one, I also make a note of godparents, and in this case, it's Stanisław Marcinkowski and Antonina Jarzyńska. I dig deeper to the BaSIA database, looking up scans of original records if available, and I do find a death record for Jakub Jarzyński. Original record says he was a shoemaker and he died 3 months before the birth of his daughter. But since this is a church death record, there are no additional information revealed in a death record other than he had a wife. So that's a dead end. But I look up the Jakub Jarzyński and Katarzyna Marcinkowska record, and I do find a marriage record in 1864 of Jakub Jarzyński and Marcjanna Marcinkowska. I do make an assumption this is a mistake, since Stanisław Marcinkowski, who's then named a witness to this wedding, was also a godparent to Stanisława Konstancja. Since Jakub died, I make another assumption that Katarzyna remarried, and I do find a second marriage for Katarzyna Jarzyńska, nie Marcinkowska, and I am confident this is a correct record because there's another witness who's common to both marriages, Jan Drażewski. So I am very confident I have the right records in front of me. Since Katarzyna married Antoni as her second marriage, I searched for their children throughout available records online, noting any details, including godparents. Apart from what you see, I'm able to find 3 more records for the children, but they're civil records, and I have no access to church records, so I have no information about who godparents were of the 3 later children. But there is no death record for Katarzyna Marcinkowska, who married first husband Jarzyński and second husband Malinowski, and nothing can be found online. Gniezno Civil Registration, which is Urząd Stanu Cywilnego, does not have an index to death records, and with no death date, they are unable to find her death record. So here's my next question. Who are the parents of Katarzyna? I do have 2 marriage records that don't list her parents. I do have baptism records of her children, but in Prussian partitions they didn't list grandparents of those children, and I don't know where and when Katarzyna died, so I have no information whatsoever to go on. Cluster research technique may be the key. You have to research the cluster, your ancestors cluster, any people that they appeared together with, any neighbors that they might lived with, and I know it's a little bit hard because Prussian records don't list addresses specifically, so you start with researching people who appear on the same records as your ancestor, and you go from there. So let's recap what I know so far about Katarzyna and Stanisława. I have a marriage record for Katarzyna, the death of her husband, the birth of her daughter, her second marriage, and birth records for her children. I make a timeline noting all the witnesses and godfathers and godmothers. But let's not forget I also have a marriage record from 1883 for Stanisława Konstancja Jerzyńska to Józef Piekarek, and I have witnesses there as well. And I wonder if you see what I see. Some Stanisław Marcinkowski is a witness at Katarzyna's wedding, a godfather to Stanisława, and a witness at Stanisława's wedding. And then some Józef Lewandowski is a witness at Katarzyna's wedding and Stanisława's wedding. And I make an assumption that those people are actually the same people throughout all the records. So who are those two people? I start search with marriage records, and I do find a marriage for Stanisław Marcinkowski, who married Józefa Wieczorek. I did search Gniezno and surrounding area and couldn't find anyone else who matches that nicely. And I'm confident this is a correct person because Józef Lewandowski is also named a witness here. So I move on to searching for Józef, and that brings a lot more results. Not surprisingly, Lewandowski is more common name, but this record here pops and focuses my attention because Józef Lewandowski married a Marcinkowska lady. Not only that, Marcinkowski is a common denominator here, Stanisław Mojecki is also appearing as a witness to both weddings. So I will pursue Józef Lewandowski and Marianna Marcinkowska first. So firstly, I go back to Stanisław Marcinkowski and Józefa Wieczorek, and looking at his birth year, he might actually be an older brother to my Katarzyna. I also search for children of this couple. Unfortunately, they only had 2 and both of them died. But something that pops at me is that Mateusz Bysikiewicz is named a godfather to one of those children. And if you recall, Józef Lewandowski actually had a witness on his wedding by the same name. So I make a note that Mateusz Bysikiewicz is another possible family member. Secondly, I go back to the marriage of Józef Lewandowski and Marianna Marcinkowska. I make an assumption that she's a sister to Stanisław and Katarzyna. And I look up their children, and interestingly enough, Marianna Welsand, Mateusz Bysikiewicz, and Wisnerowicz are appearing in those records yet again. I do find a death record for Marianna, but that actually does not give me any more information to it. I do make an assumption though that Katarzyna and Marianna and Stanisław are siblings, and Welsand, Bysikiewicz, and Wisnerowicz are somehow related to my family. I went to Katarzyna's records again and I searched for people who appear twice in those records. Malinowski is the name of her second husband, so I will not pursue that last name. And Zieliński is a very common last name in Poland, so it gave me way too many results. So I focus on Drzeżewski, and I do find a marriage of Jan Drzeżewski to Katarzyna Marcinkowska, but this Katarzyna is born more than 20 years before my Katarzyna is born, and I make an assumption at this point that she might be an aunt or in some other way related to the family, but not a sibling of my Katarzyna. They also had some children, but those records didn't give me any clues either, and there is a death record for Katarzyna, but even though it's a civil record, it doesn't tell me in any way how my Katarzyna and Stanisław Marcinkowski or Józef Lewandowski are related to this family. Well, on to Frankenbergs. I had Michał and Paulina show up as godparents to my Katarzyna's children, and it looks like those two people were actually married. Paulina was born around 1843. I have Mateusz Bysikiewicz show up as a witness again, and when I look up this couple's children, I have Józef Lewandowski show up as a godfather, and I have Marianna Welsand show up as a godmother. So I make an assumption that Paulina and Katarzyna are actually sisters. So I move on to search for other people who appeared in the records. And Mateusz Bysikiewicz, there are 2 records that are actually very interesting. The first one is a death record for Mateusz Bysikiewicz, and Marianna Welsand is a informant here. In the second record, I have Józef Lewandowski being an informant to the death of Antonina Marcinkowska, nie Bysikiewicz, whose father is Mateusz Bysikiewicz and his spouse is Michael Marcinkowski. So is it possible that Antonina is actually a mother to my Katarzyna? So I searched for Michał Marcinkowski and Antonina Bysikiewicz marriage, and I do have a successful search in 1837. And Stanisław Mojecki appears as a witness to this wedding. So I make an assumption that those are actually parents of my Katarzyna. But before I get too excited and go off track, I go back to Roman and Marianna Welsant and I find a marriage for Roman and some Franciszka Marcinkowska. I'm not really sure what happened, but the witnesses to this marriage are not listed in the original records. But fortunately, there are some kids. There's more than this. They actually had more kids, but the records I find for children after 1874 are civil and I have no godparents. But in the records that you see here, Stanisław Wisnerowicz appears again, and Elżbieta Marcinkowska appears again. If you recall, Stanisław Marcinkowski's wife was using Józef on her marriage, and then Elżbieta whenever her kids were born. So I do make an assumption that Franciszka is either a sister or a cousin to my Katarzyna. Another recap of the information I have so far and assumptions I made. So I go back to Michał Marcinkowski and Antonina Bysikiewicz's marriage, and I look up all the children that this couple had, and I do find Marianna, Stanisław, Franciszka, Paulina, and Katarzyna. And all fall very closely within the years that they claim to be born in the records I found so far. So I'm very confident that Michał Marcinkowski and Antonina Bysikiewicz are actually parents of my Katarzyna, and that Marianna, Franciszka, Stanisław, and Paulina are her siblings. Ah yes, you thought I'm done with the slides. Sorry to bore you to death. Well, like I do with every new last name I discover, I search Ancestry DNA and MyHeritage DNA for those last names, and, lucky me, my great aunt, who's actually a granddaughter of Stanisława Konstancja, has 4 people match up DNA with her, who are the direct descendants of Franciszka Marcinkowska and Roman Welsant. So I am very confident I do have my research done correctly. And the brick wall, just wanted to show you visually, this is what I started with when I started this research, and this is what I ended up with. It actually turns out that Antonina Bysikiewicz family is well established in Gniezno, and they were a very tight-knit family, using each other on record. So I'm actually continuing with my cluster of research genealogy to discover more about them. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and see you at the next one.